Transformative moment. Millionaire discovers. Shocking teacher action in lunchroom. Inspires change. Jim Anderson stood at the entrance of his old high school, a world apart from the corporate skyscrapers that symbolized his self-made wealth. At 38, he felt like a ghost in his own life, shadowed by the gilded cage he'd built around himself. The air was crisp, nostalgia heavy in his lungs, but it quickly morphed into unease as he stepped inside. Empty walls were now adorned with art projects and science fairs. He traced a finger along the faded paint, memories of dreams blooming in classrooms flooding his mind. But that flush of comfort quickly twisted into discomfort, reflecting his disconnect from the boy who once roamed these halls. The lunchroom buzzed with voices, but Jim felt like an intruder in his own past. He inhaled the scent of pizza, a reminder of simpler times that now felt like a foreign luxury. Suddenly, chaos erupted on the far side of the room. Intrigued, Jim moved closer, his heart tightening as he recognized Ms. Parker, a teacher whose encouragement had once ignited his ambitions. Here she stood, steadfast against a group of raucous bullies, her voice ringing with passion as she defended the students they mocked. Instead of cowering, she fueled resilience with her words, promoting self-acceptance instead of shame. Jim's heart raced as memories surged, each one laced with shame. Where was that fervor to protect kindness and integrity? He'd traded those values for profit and prestige, losing himself in a pursuit that now felt hollow. In that instant, Ms. Parker's defiance struck him harder than any boardroom negotiation. It rekindled feelings he had buried beneath greed. A confused swirl of admiration and guilt churned in his chest. What had he become? Before he could process these revelations, a moral dilemma began to take root within him. Should he offer scholarships and mentorships to students who reminded him of his younger self? Instinctively, he longed to provide opportunities that could transform lives, but with his past struggles as motivation, doubt lingered like a ghost. Would he be seen as a pretender trying to purchase relevance? Could wealth ever genuinely bridge the chasm of disadvantage and privilege? The thought tightened around his throat, making it hard to breathe. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. Struggling against the tide of skepticism from local leaders and the haunting whispers of entitlement, Jim felt his resolve flicker. Each plan he devised for the school, a chance for deserving kids, felt more tainted under the scrutiny of ambitious, critical eyes. The fear of his intentions being mistaken wrapped around him like chains. Would his financial support overshadow genuine merit? His mind crashed under the weight of these questions. Staring at the threshold of Ms. Parker's classroom, he felt a reckless mix of determination and desperation swirl within him. His hand hovered over the door, his body trembling with unsteady courage. He sensed the walls of the room closing in, webs of expectation suffocating his doubts. What if he opened that door only to find the truth waiting? Perhaps the problem wasn't just the students. Would the revelation redefine him? As the door creaked, revealing Ms. Parker's puzzled gaze, Jim's heart leapt into his throat. Would he find his way back to who he once was, or lose himself in the shadows of his triumph? Jim stepped inside the classroom, the familiar scent of chalk and old books enveloping him like an embrace. Ms. Parker's expression shifted from surprise to recognition, her eyes lighting up with a warmth he hadn't anticipated. The emotional chest he had carried felt slightly lighter, yet the weight of his internal struggle was far from relieved. "Jim Anderson," she said, her voice threading through the classroom's chatter. "It's been too long." "Ms. Parker," he replied, the years collapsing as he stood there. The fondness in her gaze stirred long-buried ambitions, overshadowed by his relentless climb to success. He was desperate for her validation, yet terrified of the role he had chosen to play in the world since leaving these halls. "What brings you back?" she asked, her tone half in nostalgia, half in curiosity. "I want to help," he blurted, instant regret snaking through him. Was he truly ready to take this leap? The words hung between them, heavy with implications. But as her brow furrowed, he realized it wasn't a sincere offer yet. It was a naive impulse cloaked in desperation. I think I could create scholarship opportunities or mentorships for students." Her eyes scrutinized him, not with distrust, but with an urge to discern truth among the shadows of his ego. "You're serious?" He nodded, even as an unsettling doubt clawed at him. Her eyes softened, not with sympathy, but a probing curiosity. "Why now, Jim? You had power here once. Why didn't you use your influence back then?" Caught off guard by the directness of her question, he gulped. "I was focused on my career. I thought success meant leaving this all behind." The confession felt raw. It laid bare his vulnerability. "Success," she echoed, her tone evoking bitterness that felt entirely justified. "Yet you return here, unfulfilled. Students from this very school could benefit from your wealth, but you'll need more than money for that change to take root." The harsh honesty struck him like an icy splash of water. The idea of offering financial aid was simple, but it was far less about the dollars and cents than he had hoped. Suddenly, he was no longer the well-heeled benefactor. He was just Jim, grappling with a past that felt unworthy. "Students here face challenges far beyond what money can fix, Jim." Her gaze pierced through his defenses. "You want to pass the torch, but do you even know how to light it?" A rising tide of panic surged within him. He hadn't considered her questions deeply enough. He was here to gain redemption, sure, yet offering monetary rewards without genuine understanding risked repeating the cycle of disconnection he had endured. A sliver of clarity began to punctuate his foggy thoughts. "So, where do I even start?" "Start by listening," Ms. Parker encouraged. "Understand their stories, respect their journeys. If you genuinely want change, you must dive into their struggles, not skirt around them from a distance." Her words ignited a fervor within him, illuminating the path forward. Engaging with students meant dismantling his own pretenses, but that risk tugged him closer to who he had once aspired to be. It wouldn't be an easy journey. The barriers of privilege, expectation, and self-doubt loomed large. "All right," he said, determination now layering his voice. "I want to know. I need to understand what they face." With that decision, Jim sensed the fear loosening its grip. The prospect of vulnerability felt daunting, but it contained a flicker of hope. Reclaiming authenticity, record-setting business achievements paled against the idea of rekindling genuine connections. "Let's begin," Ms. Parker said, a hint of pride breaking through and warming her tone. She motioned him to the desks where students were engaged in lively discussion. As he walked toward them, a zinging mix of apprehension and eagerness coursed through him. Would these students welcome him? Could he genuinely connect with them in ways he never had imagined before? Realization settled. This was more than charity. It was a chance at redemption. Braving the risk of rejection, he approached the group, their youthful energy palpable. Would they recognize his sincerity, or would they see only a millionaire desperate for validation? The moment felt paradoxically both nerve-wracking and exhilarating, but before he could reach out, a student caught his eye, one with striking resolve mixed with defiance. The look held no respect, only curiosity and a hint of challenge. This would be a test of his new resolve, a confrontation with the potential to unravel him. And he realized that perhaps the most significant transformation would begin here, not in giving, but in the unraveling of who he had thought he was. The group of students continued their animated conversation, unaware of the storm brewing within Jim. The piercing gaze of the student, tall, with a smattering of freckles and a defiant set to his jaw, stopped him in his tracks. It felt as if he had been laid bare, stripped of every pretense he had built around himself. Did he dare to introduce himself as Jim, the successful businessman, or would he risk revealing the uncertainty that lurked just beneath the surface? He chose the latter, taking a half step closer. "Hi, I'm Jim. I'm here to learn about your experiences." The student studied him for a moment, narrowing his eyes. "Learn? Or do you just want to play the hero?" A wave of embarrassment washed over Jim. He didn't have a rehearsed answer, just the raw truth. "I want to help, but I realize I can't do that without understanding what you all face." A ripple of muted laughter echoed among the students, and some exchanged glances as if gauging whether he was genuine or just an imposter in a world far removed from their reality. The tension was palpable, their unspoken skepticism reflected back at him like a mirror. "Okay," the same student replied, crossing his arms. "What makes you think we need your help? You don't know us. You haven't walked our path." His words were laced with frustration, a challenge that tugged at something deep within Jim. The realization struck like a cold wind. This was his immediate chance to shift from observer to contributor. Everything he had garnered in his life, all those accolades and accomplishments, meant nothing if he couldn't communicate authenticity. "You're right," Jim admitted, his voice steady, despite his heart galloping in his chest. "I don't know your stories, but I want to." A flicker of disbelief crossed the student's face, but there was curiosity too. "So, let's say you really want to listen. What's in it for you?" It was a practical question, one that bore into Jim's intentions, and he felt the weight of it pressing down. "I'm at a point in my life where I feel I've lost touch with my roots. I think confronting that would not only help me, but might also create a real impact. I hope we can find a way to learn from each other." He could see the hesitance in the students' eyes as they exchanged murmurs, but the tension around him had subtly shifted. His vulnerability was an uncharted territory, yet here he stood, offering himself as something other than a source of money. "Let's put it to the test then," the student said, a small grin breaking through the armor of skepticism. "You're going to be our guest presenter for a week. You'll attend our class, our discussions, our lunch. You need to see what life really is like for us. Then maybe we'll decide if you're worthy of our time." The challenge loomed large, and Jim felt a myriad of emotions surge within him. Fear, excitement, and determination all rolled into one. "That sounds fair," he replied, letting go of the old Jim he had carried with him for years. "And I'll meet you at every point you choose." As the tension broke, a new energy descending upon the group was invigorating in its complexity. He was ready to start this journey, but uncertainty accompanied him. Would he navigate break rooms filled with laughter and discomfort? Could he open himself to stories that stung, yet encouraged growth? In the days to come, he would step into unseen struggles that might transcend mere numbers in a financial report. Jim's resolve firmed with each passing second. Engaging with these students would require not just listening, but a willingness to participate fully, showing genuine concern for their lives. As they rotated to begin selecting topics for the discussion for the week, a thought occurred, icy and oppressive. What would he uncover within himself in the process? And what if the truths he discovered were more challenging than he had ever imagined? The moment of reckoning was upon him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was on the brink of an awakening far beyond what he had envisioned. Jim sat among the students at a long table, surrounded by a mixture of enthusiasm and trepidation. The walls echoed with laughter and chatter, but around him, the weight of uncertainty felt almost tangible. He had entered this week promising himself to be fully present. Yet, constricting tendrils of self-doubt wrapped around him, whispering that he was an imposter. As the students began introducing topics for discussion, Jim felt an intense awareness of their youthful energy. Each suggestion seemed loaded with significance, something he'd lost touch with over the years. They talked about social justice, mental health, systemic inequalities, and dreams they dared to chase. A subtle flicker of guilt surged through him. He had amassed wealth and recognition while they grappled with societal chains. "Jim, what do you think?" A girl with thick braids asked, her curiosity piercing through his introspection. Swallowing hard, he reminded himself of his commitment to honesty. "I think," he started, searching for words that would not come off as patronizing. "I think I have a lot to learn from all of you. I want to understand your perspectives, not just listen, but engage." The response was mixed. Some students nodded, while others raised an eyebrow, their skepticism surfacing again. Why would a successful businessman care about our struggles? He could almost hear them thinking. As the discussions progressed, Jim found himself engaging deeply, asking questions, recalling moments from his own youth, and unpredictably navigating emotions he thought long buried. The stories of struggle, vulnerability, and resilience they shared resonated with something he hadn't accessed in years. There was a stark honesty in their experiences, revealing cracks in his carefully constructed wall. But as the week wore on, his discomfort grew. Each revelation felt like a double-edged sword, opening his eyes to their realities while exposing his own insecurities. The girl with the braids had spoken about mental health issues, and Jim could only listen, swallowed by the knowledge of how ill-equipped he was to address such complexities, wrapped in his corporate success. One afternoon, as they gathered for lunch, Jim found himself seated with a smaller group. Their conversation shifted from academic topics to personal ones, dreams versus loans, aspirations versus expectations. The weight of their conversation crashed over him like a wave. Suddenly, with a surge of adrenaline, he decided to reveal something he had never spoken about openly. "I grew up in a single-parent household," he started, feeling out of place amidst them. "My mother worked multiple jobs, and I never got to see her as much as I wanted. I had to make my own way, and it was hard. I didn't realize how hard until I sat here with all of you." Shock rippled through the table, but as he continued, a newfound determination formed around his voice. "I know what it's like to struggle without support. It shaped who I am today. But I want to understand your stories. What drives you? What motivates your choices?" The freckled student from earlier leaned forward, his skepticism muted. "So, you're saying you want to confront your past so that you can help us with our present?" "Exactly," Jim replied, feeling lighter as he released those trapped words. "And maybe we can find common ground. I don't want to just teach. I want to learn." An uncharacteristic warmth settled over the group as laughter echoed. For the first time, they weren't just discussing ideologies. They were telling stories, forging connections. Yet beneath the surface, Jim felt a gnawing tension. How much of this newfound openness could he sustain? The thought lingered. Would these conversations peel off layers he wasn't prepared to confront? Jim's catharsis came with an unmistakable burden, the possibility of revealing too much of himself. He had only scratched the surface of understanding the depth of his own complexities. As he engaged further, a realization dawned. He was not just here to impact others, but to unearth the hidden parts of himself, the fears he had avoided for decades. Tomorrow would bring fresh discussions, pressing him deeper into challenging territories. Would he ultimately find the strength to embrace the vulnerabilities he uncovered? The next day, as Jim walked into the room, it felt different. The familiar walls, once a mere backdrop, now appeared to pulse with the energy of both connection and scrutiny. What had transformed was not merely the environment, but his own perception of it. The weight of expectation pressed heavily against his chest, intermingling with a strange exhilaration. He glanced around as students settled into their seats, the animated chatter serving as a reminder of the revelations shared yesterday. Jim had opened up rarely in his life, suggesting a newfound commitment to vulnerability, but a question lingered ominously in his mind. Would he have the courage to dive deeper today? "Okay, who wants to kick us off?" one student prompted, breaking through his introspection. There was a moment of silence, followed by a wave of hesitant exchanges. Jim picked up on the tension. They were all grappling with the duality of vulnerability and exposure. Taking a deep breath, he decided to lead this session. "How about we talk about failures?" he suggested. "What constitutes failure for you, and how do you cope with it?" The room grew quiet, eyes darting around, unsure. Finally, a student spoke up, their voice shaking. "I guess I failed my last exam. I studied hard, but when the moment came, I blanked out. It felt like all this pressure was on me, and I just failed." As the discussion opened up, more students shared their stories: failed relationships, unmet dreams, and lost opportunities. Jim listened intently, feeling the strength of their honesty, while battling with an urge to guide them toward solutions. Yet something held him back. The understanding that life wasn't always about answers. They needed to express, not to be instructed. When it was finally Jim's turn to share, he hesitated, his voice finally breaking through the hesitation. "In my early corporate days, I made a decision that cost my company a large contract. I thought I was doing the right thing, but misread the situation completely. I felt like a failure, and it shot a hole in my self-esteem." A collective gasp rippled through the students. "Wait, you're human too?" One of them laughed awkwardly, but it was charged with a genuine effort to connect. "Yes. It's something I've been wrestling with since, and like failures often do, it forced me to rethink my approach to business and life. It opened my eyes to the value of teamwork and transparency. Sometimes, it's in our failures that we learn more than in our successes." A murmur of agreement echoed around the table, but beneath that collective understanding lay a deeper tension. Jim was not just revealing a failure. He was facing a mirror, recognizing the repercussions of his past decisions on others around him. The emotional feedback from sharing his experience felt like a dare. He was being pushed to confront his professional achievements not just as milestones, but as markers of the people he had affected, positively and negatively. Yet, just when Jim thought the moment had resolved itself, a student raised their hand. "But if you learned so much from that failure, why do you still hold on to such successful titles? Aren't they at odds with the authenticity you're trying to champion?" The question hung in the air, electrifying the atmosphere. It forced Jim to confront a growing internal conflict. Despite all the financial success, was he only masking his insecurities with status? "That's the question, isn't it?" Jim replied, feeling raw but invigorated by the honesty. "I'm learning that success doesn't absolve our responsibilities. In fact, it compounds them. This week is my attempt at grappling with that truth." As the discussion continued, a gradual shift in Jim unfolded. He began to recognize the paradox that bound him. His wealth stemmed from what he once perceived as victories. Yet, his understanding of life's deeper connections emerged from failure. The layers were complex. He felt both liberated and ensnared. As the session drew to a close, the room filled with voices of hope. They shared quick plans about the next steps, focused on aspirations, clubs, and contributions. Jim realized he wanted to extend beyond this lunch. The seeds of connection were scattered, and a commitment sprouted within him. But just before the conversation officially ended, another voice piped up. "What happens when we face the bigger failures, like shaping our futures or forging careers?" The words struck hard, echoing the uncertainties that plagued not just students, but Jim himself. Tomorrow would present not only the complexity of navigating grand aspirations, but demand a reckoning with what it meant to lead and fail simultaneously. Would he find the courage to embrace the lessons embedded in both? The following day, Jim felt a sense of urgency as he approached the classroom. That lingering question from the student had settled in his mind, gnawing at him like an itch he couldn't reach. What did it mean to forge a career when he still battled inner demons rooted in his past decisions? As the bell rang, students trickled in, their expressions mirroring the same blend of anticipation and anxiety that weighed on his own heart. Today felt like a threshold. He could either step beyond it into uncharted territory or retreat into the comfort of remaining opaque. "Today, I'd like to open the floor to a bold discussion," Jim said, projecting confidence despite the turmoil beneath. "Let's talk about our fears regarding the future." The initial responses were hesitant, but he encouraged them to dig deeper. "What scares you most about starting your careers or planning your futures?" he pressed. A girl in the front row raised her hand nervously. "What if I choose the wrong path? What if I waste years of my life on a career that doesn't fulfill me?" Her raw honesty reverberated through the room, creating an opening that invited others to share similar sentiments. One student admitted to fearing financial instability, while another voiced concern about disappointing their family. Jim recognized a familiar refrain. Fear paralyzed everyone, including himself. "Those fears are valid," he said, fighting the urge to offer them misplaced reassurances. "We often worry that our choices are definitive, but in truth, paths are rarely straight lines. It's okay to pivot, to redirect your course along the way." Jim spoke from a place of experience, recalling his early career when fear had driven many of his less-than-stellar decisions. They had come with a heavy toll. Yet it was in navigating those uncertainties that he had begun to carve out not just a career, but a sense of purpose. The conversation heated up with students debating the merits of risk versus security. Jim absorbed their insights, amazed at the richness of their perspectives. But in the back of his mind, he also wrestled with his own fears. He was no longer a victim of his title. He knew he could inspire growth, but who guided him? Then, an unexpected thought struck him. How could they leverage their individual fears as fuel for growth? What if they could create a plan that transformed apprehensions into actionable goals rather than adopting a passive acceptance of anxiety? "Let's take our fears and reframe them," Jim proposed. "Identify one fear related to your career that you find particularly daunting. Then, think of a small action you can take to confront that fear. It could be as simple as researching a field you are considering, or reaching out to someone for advice." The room filled with sounds of pens scratching against paper, as students began jotting down their fears alongside actionable steps. A woman in the back whispered to her friend, sharing moments of doubt they each had faced, and for the first time, they began fueling each other's courage. Jim watched as their anxiety ceased to bind them and evolved into a collective understanding of proactive accountability. When it came time for Jim to share, he struggled against the urge to shy away from his own vulnerabilities. "I think my biggest fear is that I've built this successful facade, yet underneath, I'm still just as lost as anyone else," he admitted, surprising himself. To create change, we must confront the uncomfortable truths of our lives. The honesty in his voice hung delicately in the air, and he felt the atmosphere shift, almost as if they were collectively agreeing on the shared weight of expectation, identity, and future. The students journeyed from trepidation to empowerment, articulating paths that could propel them forward instead of keeping them tethered in place. By the end of the session, the atmosphere was electric with possibilities and support. But as Jim reflected on the discussions that had unfolded, he knew that he stood at the precipice of more daunting choices. The sense of connection had awakened a desire to confront not only his fears of career paths, but the insecurities that lingered from his past decisions. As students packed their bags and made plans to execute their newfound strategies, Jim's heart raced. Tomorrow would not just be about guiding them, it would also be about discovering what he was truly made of amidst their challenges. The moment of truth loomed over him, no longer just a figurative whisper, but a commanding voice urging him forward. Would he find the courage to reshape both his own narrative and those of the students he had come to care about deeply? As Jim walked out of the classroom, the energy of the discussion clung to him like a second skin. The tumult inside him brewed stronger now, a cocktail of unease and exhilaration. Each step felt more weighted, the hallways echoing with the footsteps of newfound resolve from his students. Yet, the undeniable truth lingered. He could not allow that energy to dissipate. His own fears, the remnants of choices made long before, were waiting to be confronted. He needed to act. He decided to break down the tasks ahead. The first step was clear. He had to reconnect with his own sense of purpose. Fueled by the authenticity displayed in the classroom, Jim resolved to revisit the aspirations he once held dear. What had driven him to become an educator? A small spark of inspiration told him to look inward, seeking what had once motivated him to step into this profession in the first place. That evening, he returned home and sat at his kitchen table with an empty notebook and a pen. The silence enveloped him, a stark contrast to the vibrant voices of his students only hours before. He felt vulnerable, exposed to the scrutiny of his own thoughts. A mental barrage of insecurities surged. What if he didn't remember? What if, after all this time, the fire had died out? He sucked in a breath, willing himself to write nonetheless. He scribbled a few sentences. I want to inspire. I want to create a safe space for exploration. He made notes on how each student had forced him to look at hard truths within himself. They deserved more than the shell of a mentor he had become. As he continued writing, the ideas flowed more freely. He penned down ideas to implement in the classroom. A mentoring project, perhaps, where students paired up to pursue passions hidden beneath layers of doubt. They could explore creative avenues, fears, and ambitions together. The thought excited him like lightning racing through his veins. The kitchen light flickered as he wrote, echoing the pulse of his imagination rekindling. He remembered a lesson he learned early in his career when he connected with a student passionate about art. It had reignited his own passions in unexpected ways. It wasn't just about confronting fears. It was also about embracing forgotten joys. With each page filled, his perspective on teaching began to shift. It wasn't merely about guiding them through practical knowledge anymore. It was about unleashing potential, both in their lives and in his own. The notion of mutual growth resonated deeply. They could inspire one another. The collaborative process could breathe life back into his own stagnation. That realization stirred another thought. What if he brought in external mentors, professionals who could share their failures and successes? It could create a stronger foundation and a thrilling bridge into the world outside school. Everyone deserves the chance to learn from mistakes, to see that fear is a part of the journey. By the time he had finished filling several pages, Jim felt as though he stood at a crossroads. He could either retreat into his old patterns, lamenting the fear of uncertainty, or risk stepping into a new realm, both as a teacher and a man searching for purpose in his life. The morning came too quickly, and despite the lingering pulse of exhilaration, doubt crept in. Would the changes resonate? Would students accept this newfound approach to their growth? As he entered the classroom, the familiar rush of anxiety mixed with a glimmer of hope. Today, he announced, feeling the weight of the moment, we're going to discuss how we can learn not just from textbooks, but from our own lived experiences. The students looked up, intrigued. Then, unexpectedly, a voice broke through the tentative silence. What do you mean, Mr. Fletcher? Are we going to learn about our failures? A chill crept up Jim's spine, but he felt a spark igniting within. Yes, he replied, his heart racing as he sensed the shift. We are going to embrace our failures together. The room buzzed with excited chatter. The tide was shifting, and Jim's thoughts churned with anticipation. This was it. The turning point where learning transcended traditional boundaries. But as the bell rang, signaling the start of this journey, a new realization haunted him. What if confronting those failures led to vulnerabilities he wasn't ready to face? The time had come to unveil the darker parts of his own story. But could he withstand the revelation? Each day, the classroom took on a new flavor of anticipation, as Jim dove deeper into the territory of vulnerability with his students. He quickly learned that opening up about failures was akin to lighting a beacon in the fog. Some students, hesitant at first, gradually approached its glow, drawn to the possibility of confession and connection. The dialogue thrived, sparking stories of academic disappointments, athletic failures, and personal losses. Jim felt a ripple of relief as he realized they were willing to explore these depths together. However, Jim had not yet revealed his own struggles. Each time he considered sharing a personal defeat, a moment from his past that still haunted him, a knot tightened in his stomach. What if his students perceived him differently? Would they see him as weak or worse, unworthy of their trust? The thought paralyzed him, yet it also pulled at him like a current, urging him to decide what kind of leader he aspired to be. Could authenticity bridge the gap between mentor and mentee? One afternoon, after a particularly spirited discussion about learning from mistakes, Jim's coworker, Ms. Lawson, approached him during lunch. She noted the change in his interactions with the students and expressed her admiration. "You're creating a safe space, Jim, but don't forget to allow them to see you. They need a real person to connect with. It's part of the learning, too." Her words struck Jim like a drumbeat echoing in his chest. They lingered, stirring something within him. Should he be the orchestrator of authenticity, yet remain hidden behind a veneer of professionalism? He leaned back in his chair, contemplating the risk and reward of self-revelation. The ensuing silence felt thick as he chewed on the gravity of her suggestion. Determined, he crafted a plan for the end of the week. He would organize a failure-sharing session, where both he and the students could take turns sharing their stories. It would be a test, not only of their willingness to be vulnerable, but his own commitment to confronting his past. This was not just a lesson in humility for his students. This was also a chance at personal reckoning. As the days unfolded, he prepared mentally, relaying his old story over and over in his mind, a vivid tapestry of missed opportunities and crushing disappointments. How had he strayed from the passion that brought him to teaching in the first place? He wanted to be more than a facilitator of growth. He sought to share the burden of imperfection that came with being human. The session arrived, and Jim felt the weight of collective trepidation fill the room. He welcomed his students, carefully gauging their expressions. Some looked anxious, while others seemed eager to share. "Today," he began, his voice steady but laced with emotion, "we break down the walls of embarrassment and shame surrounding our failures." He could feel the atmosphere shift, a tangible release of tension as they engaged in what had long been a taboo topic. One by one, students unveiled their vulnerabilities, stories that danced between moments of bravery and fear. Their laughter and tears mingled, forging a powerful bond in vulnerability. They were discovering that failure wasn't an endpoint, but a stepping stone towards growth. It became an exchange. Their stories merged with his, a symphony of shared experience. Jim's heart quickened as he absorbed the relief and acceptance in their expressions. Finally, as the time ticked away, it was his turn. He stood before them, a luminous tapestry of emotions threading through him. He swallowed hard, memories swirling. Would they still see him as a guide, or would his past fracture the connection built over the weeks? He opened his lips, unsure if words would come, as vulnerability hung in the air like a delicate thread about to snap. But before he could speak, he felt an unexpected rush of determination. This was the moment for transformation, not just for his students, but for himself. He stepped into the vulnerability and prepared to share the chapter of his life that had been cloaked in shadows. 5 years ago, he started. But before he could complete the sentence, a wave of uncertainty washed over him. Could he really share the story that had lingered too long in his silence? As the last student leaned in, eager, waiting for his truth, Jim was pushed to confront not only the challenges his students faced, but those he'd hidden deep within himself. This was the moment he could redefine not just his teaching, but himself. The bell rang, but the lesson was far from over. As he stood on the precipice of a revelation-turned acknowledgement, praying that when the time came to share, he would not falter at the edge of his own truth. What awaited after he unveiled his own failures? As the bell faded into silence, Jim's heart raced in tandem with his thoughts. The anticipation in the room buzzed like electricity, yet he felt an ache in his throat that threatened to choke him. 5 years ago, he attempted again, but the weight of that opening felt like a boulder lodged in his chest. He glanced around the room. The students looked at him, faces a canvas of curiosity and expectation. In that moment, he vacillated between the safety of silence and the liberating leap of honesty. What was it he feared? Would they dismiss him as a failure, or embrace the honesty of his humanity? Invoking a surge of courage, he plunged deeper into the pool of vulnerability. 5 years ago, he repeated, this time with a firmer voice. I was a different person. I lost everything that mattered to me. My marriage ended, primarily because I wasn't fully present, consumed by my career and my ambitions, too focused on superficial accolades rather than on the people I loved. A hush settled, and Jim could hear his pulse in his ears. As he spoke, Jim started feeling liberated, but doubt lingered, whispering that perhaps this was the exact moment he would regret. Was he revealing too much? Could he even navigate the tidal wave of potential judgment from kids who barely could comprehend adult complexities? He pressed on, desperate to find not just their understanding, but also his own closure. I allowed myself to become so obsessed with success, I forgot the essence of what it meant. I lost touch with my values, and it cost me dearly. Each word felt both like a weight lifted and a chain wrapped tighter around his heart. In that darkness, I knew that I needed a new beginning, a path to redemption, which is why I chose to become a teacher. The silence engulfed him as he caught the students' wide eyes. He was no longer just their teacher. He was a fellow traveler on the rocky road of life. They leaned closer as if the shared weight of failure and hope entwined around them, binding them in an unexpected fellowship. Then a hand shot up from the back. It was Lisa, a perceptive student who had shared her own story of struggling to connect with her family. "But Mr. Collins," she said softly, "did you overcome it? Are you still failing?" This question turned the tide. Jim's breath hitched. It was a poignant reminder that vulnerability must lead to resolution. He had not just come to share past failures, but to illustrate the journey towards healing. "Every day is a choice," he replied steadily. "I still battle moments of self-doubt. There are days when I question whether I've truly changed, if I'm enough. But part of growth is understanding that it's a lifelong process. We face our failures, learn, and move forward. Together." The atmosphere shifted again as nods slowly cascaded, acceptance blooming in the air. The stories he had hoped would foster connection now echoed back to him, shimmered by shared experiences. Something profound pulsed within the room. His past no longer felt like a burden, but a catalyst for growth, a means to forge deeper bonds. The class ended, but instead of scattering, students lingered, asking questions, sharing insights. Jim felt the narrative of solitude he lived transform into a chorus of voices, threading their stories of hardship into a collective tapestry of resilience. Amidst this transformation, one student approached him, a boy he often overlooked. "Can we do this again?" he asked, vulnerability swimming in his gaze. Jim's heart swelled. He could see the seeds of courage sprouting in a space once dominated by fear. As the room emptied, Jim stood alone for a moment, reflecting on the unexpected power of that hour. An awakening stirred inside him. The path ahead was clearer, mapped out by the threads of shared humanity. But beneath that clarity lurked another pressing thought. What if he could facilitate more than just a single session on vulnerability? What if he could create an entire movement rooted in this authenticity? As the idea began to take shape, he couldn't help but feel a blend of excitement and fear. His journey was only at its inception. What could he truly build from here? One truth echoed in his mind, a siren call to action. The time had come to face not just his past, but to usher in a new era of teaching, one that could inspire others to rise from the ashes of their own mistakes. As he gathered his things, he pondered how he might weave this new vision into the curriculum. The possibilities were endless, yet overwhelming. Could he truly be the catalyst for change? Before he exited the classroom, he cast one last glance back. What awaited next? In that moment, he understood. With the right steps, an entire legacy could emerge from the very failures he feared to voice. With each passing day, Jim Anderson found himself further enveloped in the transformative journey he had embarked on alongside his students. The weight of yesterday's vulnerabilities morphed into a foundation on which he began to build something profound. No longer did he feel like an outsider peering in. He was immersed in the authenticity of shared experiences. In the weeks that followed, Jim embraced the introspective dialogues that fostered openness and understanding, solidifying the backbone of his teaching philosophy. Every session became a conduit for collective growth, a forum where fears were disarmed and aspirations ignited. The students, inspired by his vulnerability, shed their inhibitions, diving deep into the discussion of their dreams, failures, and lessons learned. On a particularly significant afternoon, amidst the discussions, Jim boldly proposed a collaborative project, a portfolio showcasing their journeys of overcoming obstacles. "This project isn't just about academics," he announced, excitement threading through his voice. "It's about capturing our growth, our resilience. Let's document where we started, where we fell, and how we stand tall now." The students erupted into exhilarated chatter, enthusiasm revitalizing the classroom chemistry. It was a palpable sense of ownership and empowerment in the air, one that stemmed from their shared resolve. By encouraging them to narrate their stories, Jim realized he wasn't merely a facilitator. He had become a catalyst for transformational narratives. With the project in motion, Jim witnessed a profound evolution within himself as well. He was no longer defined by his past failures or measured by his professional successes. His sense of self was being redefined by the lives he was helping to shape. He felt grounded, instilling a renewed sense of purpose that had long eluded him. The memories of failure shifted from being burdensome scars to badges of honor, an acknowledgement of growth earned, not given. After several weeks of hard work, it was finally time to unveil their portfolios. As the day approached, an undeniable flurry of emotions surged through the students and Jim alike, a mixture of pride, nervousness, and exhilaration. The atmosphere crackled with anticipation. They had poured their truths onto the pages filled with raw honesty. On presentation day, the room filled with parents, faculty, and peers. As Jim listened to the stories being shared, each student took center stage, articulating their journeys with an eloquence that surpassed even his highest expectations. They recounted failures that felt insurmountable at the time, illuminating paths of recovery, redefining their perspectives in striking ways. The line between teacher and student blurred. The shared moments forged connections that transcended traditional educational boundaries, rooting deeper into shared humanity. Jim felt a surge of pride swell within him. Seeing these young minds confront their vulnerabilities brought him immense fulfillment. As he stepped up to share his story, bolstered by the raw energy from his students, he realized the time had come to demonstrate his complete transformation. He addressed the audience with clarity, no longer encumbered by the weight of fear. "I stand before you, not as the successful businessman I once was," he declared, looking intently into the faces of his students and their families, but as someone who has discovered the importance of mistakes and the power of resilience. The audience burst into applause, but Jim's focus remained on his students. They had helped him rediscover his commitment to authentic teaching. This acknowledgement resonated deeply. The previously hollow accolades now felt fortified by purpose and passion. After the presentations, a palpable shift occurred in the classroom. It was as if a new spirit had taken hold among the students. They were empowered to pursue their futures with a renewed sense of self-worth, recognizing that their dreams could be forged through willingness to embrace their trials head-on. Weeks turned into months, and an idea began to blossom within Jim. A mentor program materialized, allowing him to bring in industry professionals from various fields who had faced their share of failures. By connecting his students with these figures, he aimed to dispel the myth of perfection. Perhaps vulnerability was the ingredient that had been missing all along, the richest soil from which to sow seeds of understanding. As Jim sat in his classroom reflecting on this journey, the shadow of self-doubt he'd long struggled with felt lighter. He was no longer defined by numbers and titles. He had staked his claim in the life of a teacher committed to growth and connection. He stood confidently as he navigated future obstacles, both for himself and his students. Ultimately, Jim Anderson had transformed. In his eyes, the accolades forged by success were no longer the ultimate measure of worth. Rather, the lasting impact on the lives of others became his newfound definition of achievement. Through embracing vulnerability, he had conquered the specter of insecurity lurking within, and emerged with a solid confidence rooted in authenticity. This was not just an accomplishment, it was a commitment, a profound transformation reflected in the progress of each life touched. Before the trajectory of his life changed, he had always strived to achieve wealth and professional prestige. Now, he reveled in the satisfaction of facilitating growth, building dreams from the ground up in the fertile fabric of human experience. The final confirmation of his growth came at the end-of-year celebration. A heartfelt message from a student resonated through the hall. "Thank you, Mr. Anderson, for showing us that success isn't about never failing, but about how we rise from those failures." That statement encapsulated Jim's journey and marked his arrival at a place of genuine fulfillment. As the celebration continued around him, he knew with certainty this was the life he had been meant to lead. Life would still present challenges, but now Jim faced them armed with courage and clarity, his heart resolute in the conviction that he was building towards something far greater than himself. And he felt, for the first time, that he had truly arrived. Now, you need to subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm. Seriously, it makes a difference. Comment your reactions and theories about the ending. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. Don't wait, even one more second. This is the moment to show your support for authentic stories of personal overcoming.